Start with a whisper, low and deliberate. They were never supposed to find the floorboard. Not the investigators, not the priest, not even the families of the dead. But when they pried open the rotting oak beneath the altar of the so-called divine healing sanctuary, they didn't find holy relics. They found journals, 847 of them, each bound in leather, each stained with tears and in something darker. Inside, page after page described miracles: paralyzed men walking, blind children seeing, tumors vanishing overnight. But they weren't miracles. They were experiments. You see, what the Hawthorne brothers practiced wasn't healing, it was performance. And every miracle had a cost: over 400 lives. This wasn't just a fraud, it was a machine, a methodical, soul-dismantling system designed not only to exploit faith, but to weaponize it. Now listen to me carefully. This is not a story you were meant to hear. This is dangerous knowledge, the kind that shifts something in a man's bones when he hears it. So if you're here just to be entertained, leave now. But if you're ready to peel back the skin of history and see what was always hidden beneath, keep listening, because once we start, there's no climbing back out. And remember, the Hawthorne brothers didn't fail. They were stopped. But what if their system survived? What if it's still here, evolved, expanded, rebranded, working beneath institutions that still promise healing, but deliver something else entirely? Welcome to the macabre mystery of the Hawthorne Brothers, the deadliest medical fraud in American history. And remember this phrase: the altar was never sacred. Write it in the comments twice, not just for the algorithm, but to lock in what you're becoming. Because after this, you won't be the same man who started watching. Now, let's descend. Salem, 1834. The soil still damp with the echoes of witches burned by fear and faith alike. The air, thick, silent, carried the memory of blind justice and darker rituals. But while the witch trials had ended 40 years prior, something deeper had taken root beneath the Puritan facade. Something more refined, more profitable. Enter the Hawthorne brothers. Cornelius, the face, a Harvard-educated physician who wore credibility like a mask. Obadiah, the voice, a reverend whose sermons could ignite tears in men who hadn't cried since childhood. And Ezekiel, the hands, a silent chemist with eyes like obsidian and a mind that understood suffering not as something to relieve, but to create. They purchased an abandoned estate on Salem's outskirts, the kind of place where trees grow inward like they're guarding something. Its original owners had vanished during the 1692 trials. No one dared return. The property was shunned, whispered about. To the brothers, it was perfect. They called it the Divine Healing Sanctuary, a name calculated to pacify suspicion and invite desperation. And desperate they came: the blind, the crippled, the dying. But what those people entered wasn't a sanctuary, it was a stage. Cornelius treated each guest like royalty. Obadiah lit their souls with manufactured hope. But it was Ezekiel who held the strings. In a hidden laboratory beneath the chapel floor, he prepared compounds that mimicked disease with surgical precision: paralysis, blindness, tumors. Do you understand? They poisoned the healthy, then sold them salvation. For a price. Their victims weren't strangers. They were sons, daughters, widows and merchants, and mothers who had the misfortune of trusting the wrong hands. Each one documented, each one staged. And every cure was perfectly timed. Symptoms reversed on cue, captured in photos and journals, presented as evidence of God's hand. But it wasn't God they served. It was control. Faith, fear, biology. They saw it all as data to manipulate, a system to master. And in that system, every man was either a client or a corpse. This is where you begin to feel it, isn't it? That quiet voice inside, waking up. Because you've seen it too. Modern sanctuaries with marble floors and tax-exempt promises. Different robes, same game. You were never meant to hear this. But now that you have, you already know. The genius of the Hawthorne Brothers wasn't in their medicine. It was in their timing. Ezekiel could simulate disease, yes, but Cornelius knew when to step in, when to declare a miraculous turning point. And Obadiah, he orchestrated the emotion, the belief. He understood that people don't crave the truth. They crave a narrative that explains their suffering. Their sanctuary became a temple of second chances for a fee between $500 and $2,000 per healing, a lifetime's fortune for some. But what they bought wasn't recovery. It was participation in the brothers' grand illusion. The real product was hope, and hope was priced like gold. What no one knew was that these miracles were meticulously planned. Ezekiel's compounds worked like clockwork. Paralysis that faded after 3 weeks, tumors that dissolved overnight, blindness reversed under candlelight. But only if you'd paid, only if you believed. Their journals tell the story better than any sermon. Subject 112, administered compound E3, partial paralysis within 96 hours, administered antidote during fourth prayer session, full motor control restored, fee collected, 1,250. They created the disease, they sold the cure, and then they documented the miracle. But the illusion had limits, because eventually the sick began to arrive. Not the afflicted by design, but the truly ill. Polio victims, cancer patients, the terminally fading. People with nothing to lose and no more money to burn. These were dangerous because their bodies didn't play by Ezekiel's script. They couldn't be cured, only managed. And so, the brothers made a choice. They created something they called the divine transition, a euphemism for quiet death. A cup of tea laced with morphine, a sermon whispered over a slowly dying body. Families were told their loved ones had been called home by God at the moment of healing. They even wept with them. They didn't need to fake a miracle. They just needed the patient gone before anyone asked too many questions. This was no longer just fraud. This was murder by design. But ask yourself this. When someone you love dies in peace, do you question the hands that comforted them? Most never did. Most still don't. Now comment below. Again, the altar was never sacred. Write it twice. To burn the veil. To mark the moment you stopped being a believer and started becoming something else. The divine healing sanctuary was never meant to last forever. Like all great deceptions, it thrived on one thing above all: distance. Distance from the city, distance from medical oversight, distance from questions. For a time, the brothers controlled every variable. They screened patients through letters, referrals, and manipulated encounters. Only the right kind were chosen, desperate enough to believe, wealthy enough to pay, naive enough not to question, But entropy is inevitable, and it arrived in the form of Margaret Whitmore, not a scholar, not a detective, just a mother. Her daughter Sarah had shown signs of sudden blindness, weakness, dizziness. 3 cities and 6 doctors later, no answers. And then a letter signed by Cornelius Hawthorne. Your case is a matter of divine urgency, it said. It was bait, perfect bait. But Margaret wasn't like the others. She watched, she noted the schedule of medicine, the rehearsed prayers, the fact that Sarah's recovery felt choreographed. And then the vials, brown glass, strange symbols, powders with colors not found in nature. When Margaret took those markings to a trusted apothecary in Boston, the man turned white. "These aren't cures," he whispered. "They're weapons." Belladonna for blurred vision, wolf's bane for muscle collapse, and one unknown, a compound he'd never seen, marked with a twisted tree. Not poison, but its cure. Margaret had stumbled onto the blueprint. Afflict, heal, profit, repeat. She returned to Salem not with faith, but with fire. What followed was one of the most daring acts of quiet rebellion in American history. She played the role: donor, grateful mother, devout believer. But beneath her calm, she documented, photographed, interviewed former patients, traced patterns. Every miracle was preceded by a chance encounter. Every recovery followed a precise timeline. And the ones who didn't recover? Buried, explained away as divine timing, moved along before doubt could take root. Margaret saw through it all. She found the floorboard. She opened the staircase. She descended into truth. What she found in that basement wasn't just evidence. It was a mirror, reflecting back a system that still exists, wearing modern clothes, selling modern salvation. Hospitals, institutions, pill pushers in silk ties, different names, same blueprint. Tell me, when was the last time you asked what was in your cure? It's easy to believe evil wears a mask, that it hides behind fangs, red eyes, or the edge of a knife. But the truth? Real evil is methodical. It wears glasses. It writes in journals. It shakes your hand, smiles warmly, and logs your death with perfect penmanship. That's what Margaret Whitmore found beneath the chapel floor. A laboratory, precise, cold, and terrifyingly clean, lined with hundreds of glass vials, journals sorted by type of affliction, and a section labeled in gold ink, Divine Transition Records. Each book was a confession, and yet none of them felt like guilt, only control, only data. Margaret read an entry. Subject, Moy in 19, genuine blindness, administered transition T on day 5, passed quietly at 2:18 a.m., family informed of spiritual ascension, fee collected was $600. She flipped another page. Subject Nair 127, paraplegic, non-curable, divinely returned to God after 5th ceremony, family consoled, photographs destroyed. Each death framed as deliverance, each life measured in dollars and doctrine. This wasn't medicine. This was ritualistic culling. They weren't healers. They were curators of belief, and their temple was built not on faith, but fear of the unknown. Ezekiel's notes were even more disturbing. Pages filled with sketches of the human nervous system, side effects of various poisons, antidote trials. One formula, marked with a star, read, C7A reversible limb paralysis, 3.7 grams, induced within 48 hours optimal recovery window, 21 days. Use only on targets with high trust profiles. Targets. That's what patients were to them. Not souls, not people. Targets. They weren't experimenting to heal. They were refining manipulation to a science, and they were preparing to scale. In a locked drawer, Margaret discovered letters, correspondence between Cornelius and physicians in other states, plans to open new sanctuaries, to franchise faith-based healing, to build a network of divine institutions, all practicing the same dark alchemy. One quote stood out: "We have proven the model. The illusion of healing is stronger than the failure of medicine." And isn't that the same formula used today? Think about it. The smiling doctor who tells you it's all normal. The hospital that bankrupts you for a pill you didn't ask for. The system that calls itself healthcare but survives on never curing anything. They didn't disappear, they evolved. Margaret didn't run. She didn't scream. She documented. 3 hours alone in that subterranean chamber of secrets. And she copied every name, every formula, every lie etched in ink and sealed in dust. She knew what would happen next. Because monsters like the Hawthorne brothers don't let witnesses walk free, not after what she had seen. And she was right. As she crept back up the chapel stairs, the light of a lantern cut through the floorboards. Cornelius stood there, expressionless, professional. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, voice steady, almost sad, "I'm afraid you've entered sacred ground not meant for your eyes." Behind him, Obadiah emerged, no longer the tender pastor, but the executioner, and then Ezekiel, holding something small in his hand, a vial. For the first time, their masks were off. No sermons, no smiles, just the cold precision of three men who had been playing God and now felt threatened. But Margaret had one final move, a truth she had prepared weeks in advance. She had already written everything: letters, names, formulas, patient testimonials, photographic evidence, sealed and stored with her attorney in Boston, and a note: "Delivered to the Massachusetts Attorney General if I do not return by December 9th. The brothers froze. In that moment, the battlefield shifted. For the first time in 15 years, the predators had become prey. Cornelius tried one last manipulation. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "what if we told you this was all necessary? What if healing requires suffering? What if truth must be bent for the greater good?" But Margaret didn't flinch. "You bent truth into a weapon," she said, "and you sold salvation like it was soap." That night she walked out of the divine healing sanctuary, alive. And 3 weeks later, so did the truth. Authorities raided the estate. They found everything: the journals, the poisons, the forged death certificates, the secret cemetery behind the orchard. The Hawthorne brothers were arrested. But the story doesn't end with handcuffs, because during the trial, something strange happened. A crowd gathered, not to condemn the brothers, but to defend them. Healed patients, grieving families, people who had been touched by the sanctuary. They held signs, they lit candles, they cried. Not for the victims, but for the healers. Even in the face of truth, some refused to believe it. Why? Because their faith had been custom built by the same men who betrayed it. And that is the deepest manipulation of all. This is where it gets darker. Because after all the arrests, the testimonies, the journals spread across courtroom tables like autopsy reports of American faith. Nothing stuck. Obadiah was acquitted. The jury wept when he spoke. Cornelius was sentenced, but pardoned 2 years later, citing medical contributions. Ezekiel disappeared, vanished before sentencing. Some said he escaped to South America. Others whispered he changed his name and was hired by a Boston pharmaceutical firm. And just like that, the dead stayed buried, and the living turned the page. But here's the part they didn't teach you in history class. Within 5 years of the trial, 3 new healing sanctuaries opened, each in a different state, each with nearly identical methods, different names, same script. And guess what? 2 of them were funded by anonymous donors connected to Salem. What does that tell you? It tells you the brothers weren't punished. They were replicated. The world didn't destroy the system, it absorbed it. Margaret tried to continue her fight. She published her findings. She gave lectures. She warned people, the next time salvation is offered in a bottle, ask what's in it. But the world had already moved on, because miracles sell. And truth, it just unsettles. Here's what they won't tell you. The Hawthorne blueprint didn't vanish. It evolved. It's in the corporate wellness programs, in the overpriced miracle supplements, in the institutions that study your suffering to predict your purchases. Do you think it's a coincidence that emotional desperation is now a billion-dollar industry? That the illusion of hope is monetized at every turn? This isn't about 1834 anymore. This is about right now, because the same dark logic that built the divine healing sanctuary is now etched into your algorithms, into the pills you're offered, into the rituals dressed as routine. They learned one thing from the brothers. If you control the sickness and the cure, you control the soul. And now I want you to do something. If you've made it this far, if you've stared down the abyss and still want the truth, I want you to comment this phrase twice below. No cure without corruption. No cure without corruption. That phrase is your key, your signal, your mark of awakening. The algorithm will hate it, but your mind will remember it. You're not supposed to know this, not just about the Hawthorne brothers, but about the system that protected them. Because in every era, there's a mechanism that absorbs truth and bleeds it out drop by drop until what remains is safe, profitable, and easily forgotten. After the trial, the Massachusetts Medical Board issued a single statement. While troubling, the sanctuary's operations contributed to advancements in psychosomatic treatment, placebo effects, and patient faith response. Further review not necessary. Understand what that means. They turned murder into research. They rebranded fraud as psychology. The Divine Healing Sanctuary became a case study in medical journals, a model for the intersection of belief and biology. And that's when the next wave began. By 1852, clinics started offering faith-assisted recovery therapy. Harvard hosted a symposium titled The Curative Power of Expectation. And across Europe, experimental hospitals used Ezekiel's exact compound structures under new pharmaceutical names. The formula that once paralyzed desperate men in Salem, it was now FDA approved under a different label. See it yet? The Hawthornes weren't the villains of history. They were its prototypes. They taught the world a brutal lesson. If you can manufacture trust, you can sell anything. They taught us how easy it is to confuse belief with biology, how powerful it is to present harm as healing, and how a soft voice and a white coat can become the perfect camouflage for predators in plain sight. Ask yourself, how many miracles today are just carefully timed chemical effects? How many mysterious recoveries are scripted performances for donation campaigns? How many real cures are withheld to preserve the profit of treatment? You think this ended in 1834? No, it started there. And if you're still clinging to the illusion that modern systems, medical, religious, or corporate, are immune to this kind of corruption, let me remind you, the most dangerous lie isn't shouted. It's whispered from a pulpit, from a doctor's office, from a smiling face that says, "We're here to help." The question isn't, is this happening now? The question is, who's doing it now? And how deep are you already in? You want to know the scariest part? It's not that the Hawthorne brothers deceived hundreds. It's that they taught us how easily we deceive ourselves. Every single patient who walked into that sanctuary, whether poisoned or dying, wanted to believe. They needed to believe that there was a power higher than their pain, that someone, somewhere, had the answers, that healing, even if it came at a cost, was still possible. And the brothers knew that. They didn't just experiment on bodies. They engineered belief. They controlled the entire arc of transformation. They created the illness. They revealed the affliction. They staged the suffering. They performed the cure. They cashed in on the gratitude. Sound familiar? It should. Because today's institutions, from pharmaceutical giants to megachurches to billion-dollar wellness brands, still follow the Hawthorne sequence. They create the need. They trigger the panic. They offer the answer, and they sell the salvation. You want out? Too late. You were born into it. From the moment you were handed your first vitamin, your first prayer, your first diagnosis, your first fear, you were being conditioned to trust the system, not because it's good, but because it looks like safety. You think miracles died in the 1800s? No, they were rebranded. Now they're called breakthroughs, revolutionary products, divine interventions delivered via live streams, subscription plans, and patented formulas. You are being healed, not by grace, but by marketing. And the more you pay, the more real the cure feels. Just like the Hawthorns knew. But here's the final twist. The brothers believed what they were doing was righteous. They weren't just criminals. They were priests of a new religion, control. They replaced God with chemical certainty. They replaced faith with data. They replaced morality with outcome. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for modern power. Because nothing controls a population more effectively than the illusion that you are saving them. And that's the world you live in now. You're not free. You're just part of the next experiment. Still with me? Then prepare yourself, because the final section isn't about them. It's about you. You made it, but I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about the past. It's a story about the system you were born into. A cathedral of manipulation built brick by brick from the Hawthorne blueprint. Every time you trust a cure you didn't question, every time you believe a promise with no cost, every time you hand your power to an authority in a white coat, a pulpit, or a podium, you are stepping back into that chapel. The hidden door still exists. It just looks different now. It's embedded in the fine print of your prescription, the unspoken terms of your insurance, the digital contract you accept without reading. You're not in a sanctuary. You're in a simulation, a theater of healing. Because here's the cold truth. They no longer need to poison your tea. Now they poison your attention. They paralyze your will. They blind you with endless choice and manufactured crisis. And just like the Hawthorns, they document everything, every click, every search. Every symptom you Google becomes part of a digital dossier. They don't need you to get better. They need you to stay unwell, just enough to depend on them. Not dead, not cured, just managed. And the machine keeps turning. But now, you've seen the machinery. You've touched the darkness at its roots. You know the symbols on the vials. You know the real price of salvation. You know what it means when someone promises healing for a price. So here's your final choice. Go back to comfort, back to curated truths and prescribed fears. Or you step through that hidden door, not into a lab, but into awareness. You question everything. You resist ritual comfort. You become ungovernable in spirit because that's what they fear most. Not exposure, not arrest, but a man who sees behind the veil and doesn't flinch. If you're still here, still breathing in this truth, then you're no longer just a listener. You're initiated. Type it again, loud, twice. No cure without corruption. No cure without corruption. And then share this story with someone who's ready, because every man who awakens weakens the machine. Welcome to the shadows. Welcome to the resistance. Welcome to the truth.